Self and turn off the video until Maryland Environmental Service comes on. Is that okay?
Yep. Thank you to one of MES's two treasurers. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Transportation and Environment Subcommittee on Appropriations budget briefings. We have three agencies today, and in order of how we'll hear them: the Maryland Insurance Administration, the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, or WMATA, and the Maryland Environmental Service, or MES. We are going to start with the Maryland Insurance Administration. I should also note up front, we're a little light-handed on the subcommittee today, and I might need to step out briefly for a bill hearing in another committee, but we'll just assess that as we go if we need to take any kind of pause or anything. The vice chair of the full committee, Vice Chair Chang, is here if we need him to keep us on the straight and narrow. So with that, we'll start with the Maryland Insurance Administration and our analyst, Kelly Norton. Kelly?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will share my screen. Give me one moment. It is not cooperating.
Mr. Chairman, I want to take this brief moment to say hello to a very old friend of mine whom I just noticed there, Greg Durwood. We worked together, how many, 4 years when Governor Ehrlich was there. Good to see you.
Nice to see you, Delegate. Good afternoon. Thanks for saying hi.
Delegate Kittleman has worked with everybody, and just while we're waiting for Kelly, I'll just note that the Deputy Commissioner, Mr. Durwood's going to be speaking for the administration. The Commissioner informed us a couple of days ago she had a scheduling conflict, and appreciate the Deputy Commissioner stepping in. Kelly, how's it going? Yep, there you go.
Here we are. Sorry for the delay. Okay, the Maryland Insurance Administration budget increases 4.4% to $35.1 million in fiscal 2023. The largest portion of the budget goes toward personnel with 79%, followed by IT spending. The budget increase of $1.5 million is due to many factors. Personnel costs increased due to health insurance for employees and retirees, and other factors increasing the budget is increased spending on new equipment such as copiers, an ongoing IT project, and various IT items. MIA conducts a review of every insurance policy and contract to ensure that all legal requirements for the policy and contract are met. The agency also reviews and approves rates for most life and health and property and casualty insurance products. The exhibit here shows form filings increase in fiscal 2021, but are expected to decrease in fiscal 23 by 6.5% for total life and health form filings and 11.5% for total property and casualty form filings. The percent of forms reviewed within guidelines was 96.8 in fiscal 21 and expected to decrease to 95.8 in fiscal 22. The Fraud Division is responsible for investigating complaints relating to alleged insurance fraud committed by insurance companies, insurance producers, or consumers. In fiscal 21, there were 329 referrals opened for investigation, up from 247 in 2020. There was also an increase in the percent of open referrals investigated and referred for criminal prosecution. It went from 35% in 2020 to 67% in 2021. However, the percentage of cases closed within 180 days remains low at 41% of those open. The agency points to the pandemic's effect on daily operations, to long-term criminal investigations, and attrition issues in the Fraud Division. The agency is recruiting 2 positions currently. The agency also depends on Excel for case tracking. MIA should comment on how the new tracking system will improve its operations in the expected implementation timeline. The Office of Legislative Audits released an audit of MIA in March of 2021. There were 8 findings, including 1 repeat finding, indicating that MIA continued to use premium tax spreadsheets that lacked adequate controls to ensure the propriety of tax data recorded in the results of premium tax audits. MIA should comment on the audit findings and its efforts to address the issues raised in the audit, particularly the adoption of an automated system to redress the repeat finding. MIA had 2 repeat findings in the statewide review of budget closeout transactions for fiscal year 21. MIA could not readily explain a $1 million deficit in the health regulatory fund that was improperly offset by unrelated surplus funds in the insurance regulation fund. MIA should be prepared to brief the budget committees on the reason for this continued deficit and the corrective actions that are being taken. For the second finding, MIA failed to justify the retention of $3.3 million in the Healthcare Provider Rate Stabilization Fund, or RSF. MIA has argued the funds are necessary to cover any premium tax refunds to health maintenance organizations and managed care organizations. MIA should brief the budget committees on the current balance being held in the RSF and provide further explanation as to why it believes that these funds had to be retained, including a time frame on potential refund requests. Summation, DLS concurs with the governor's allowance. And this concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Kelly. If any of my colleagues have questions, please use the raise hand function. Okay, I do not see anything, so let's turn it over to the Deputy Commissioner for the agency's remarks.
Thank you, Chairman Corman, and good afternoon, members of the subcommittee. I'm Greg Durward, Deputy Commissioner of the Maryland Insurance Administration. And as the chairman mentioned, I'm here on behalf of Commissioner Kathleen Borain, who is testifying on Senate Bill 395 at this time. So she apologizes for not being here with us this afternoon. Also here with us is Bill Seymour, who is from SB & Company. He's been assisting the MIA in a consultant role implement the OLA audit recommendation. So he's also assisting in improving processes in general and identifying opportunities for additional staff training and possible personnel gaps. So in terms of responding to the DLS analysis, let me first highlight in terms of the budget itself. As Kelly mentioned, the 2 main items that are larger than last year are the salary increases that are being proposed across all state agencies, as well as several technological improvements. Namely, our insurance tracking system project, or ITS, is a major initiative to replace our legacy enterprise system. We're in the beginning stages of this 3-year project. And then also several budget items under contractual services include enterprise network switch replacements, server replacements, and several cybersecurity upgrades, including supply chain monitoring, threat intelligence software, supplemental security training for our team members, and cloud-based security monitoring tools. In terms of the OLA's March 2021 audit and our response to that, let me first say, in general, we're putting several things in place from a staffing and fiscal operating procedures standpoint. We've updated and are implementing revised standard operating procedures for our assessments and accounting data entry processes. And as I mentioned, we've engaged the services of a CPA consultant firm that was recommended to us by GAD in the Controller's Office to assist our fiscal services unit in implementing the revised SOPs and providing recommendations on staff training and restructuring. And Bill's here if you have any specific questions regarding those efforts. And then in terms of the repeat finding regarding our premium tax spreadsheets and lacking adequate controls, there was a 2-pronged approach to our response to this. Number one was to improve our existing processes with our Excel spreadsheets that we use. And while there's always going to be an element of manual processing for our financial regulation division, which needs to ensure that carrier premiums are placed in the appropriate category. And by the way, these processes have been detailed and forms have been adopted to document each step. The part that can be automated has been through a pretty sophisticated spreadsheet program by our actuarial team. Cells are locked and once the financial analysts input the data, the calcs are performed and the amount to be billed to each carrier subject to the assessment is identified for our fiscal unit, our accounting department, which then performs the task of invoicing and collecting the amounts. So the second step, is a long-term automated system. And now that we've documented the process and we're ensuring that we're following FOMAR rate requirements, we can now look at our options for automation. If we can find an off-the-shelf system that would totally automate this process, even with some customization, that would be our preference. We also plan to see if this automation could be incorporated into our ITS project through a possible contract modification. So that's the plan there moving forward. And then there were, in terms of two questions that came out of the fiscal 21 closeout process. First, the healthcare regulatory fund. Our deficit balance was acknowledged in our response to the March 2021 audit findings and recommendations. In consultation with our legal counsel, we identified a plan for recoupment, which the OLA audit team did determine to be satisfactory. The result of the first year of the recoupment plan resulted in a decrease of the deficit balance from approximately 1.4 million at the end of fiscal 20 to approximately $1 million at the end of fiscal 21, June 30th, 2021. So the MIA's plan of recoupment aims to eliminate the deficit balance in the healthcare, the health regulatory fund by fiscal year 2025. And then finally, as far as the rate stabilization fund is concerned, the MIA has historically retained a balance in the rate stabilization fund to fund premium tax refunds to companies that had overestimated and overpaid their premium tax and are entitled to a refund. This practice was acknowledged in our responses to the March 2021 audit findings and recommendations. As of June 30, 2021, in anticipation of the repeal of the RSF, which did happen on July 1st, 2021, the MIA transferred over $208 million to the Department of Health and retained a balance to address potential refunds. Since the fund has sunset, there will be no future revenue to offset or fund the refunds. So the MIA was intentional about taking a conservative approach to retaining a certain amount of the funds. The amount of the funds currently retained equal just over 3.3 million. That's as of December 21st of 2021. And pursuant to Section 6-109B of the insurance article, the commissioner has up to 3 years to audit premium tax returns. And so the deadline for an insurer to file a claim for a refund is 3 years from the date the tax, interest, or penalty is paid, as pursuant to Section 13-1104A of the tax general article. So it's the recommendation of our legal counsel, as well as the legal counsel of the Office of the Controller, that the MIA retain this balance, this $3.3 million balance for this 3-year period. So given the advice of the OAG, the MIA intends to keep funds until the period for requesting refund has expired. So in conclusion, I know the DLS concurs with the governor's allowance, and we ask that you look favorable on our submission, and I'm happy to answer any specific questions that you have.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. Just on that second to last point, the 3.3 million, what is the actual date at which time the remainder of that balance will be transferred to MDH?
It would depend on the last payment that's made. I think that starts the clock on the 3-year threshold. So in essence, those payments have been made. And so starting from this point forward would be the 3-year clock.
Okay, well, you didn't make the
I
last
can
payment
get an
today,
exact.
so would you mind getting the date for?
Yeah, I'll get the exact date for you. Yeah.
Thank you. Do any of my other colleagues have questions? Just you can use your raise hand function. Okay, I do have a couple other questions. They're actually on behalf of a colleague, and so perhaps we can follow up offline. I don't expect you necessarily have the answers to these offhand. The first question is, does MIA track its customer complaints, the type of complaint, the type of insurance, the zip code source of the complaints, those kinds of metrics?
We have a pretty robust consumer complaints process, both on the life and health and P&C side. So if there's any specific questions regarding that, I'm happy to get details on whatever your colleague is looking for.
Okay, I probably want some kind of report spit out to show them the sort of range of things. So we'll follow up with you on that. And his second question relates to a Consumer Federation of America loss ratio analysis of the auto industry, which, just jumping to the conclusion, found that, Marylanders should have received another $600 million back because of the lack of claims from the early part of COVID in, I guess, premium refunds. I don't know if you're familiar with that analysis or have any comment on it. Again, I'm happy to follow up with you.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the report, but as you know, I'm not your subject matter expert on the regulatory side. I'm your operations person. So I'm happy to get some details on that for you.
Terrific. So either Kelly Norton or Ken Weaver from the staff will be following up with you or your team to answer these questions for Delegate Bridges. Does anybody else have any questions for the Maryland Insurance Administration? Great. Well, Deputy Commissioner, thank you for pinch hitting today. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Kelly.
My pleasure. Thank you.
With that, colleagues, that timing worked perfectly because Secretary Ports arrived, so we can turn to the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority. We will start with the budget analysis from Steve McCulloch. Steve.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, or WMATA, will drop right to the ridership, looking at the impact of COVID, similar to transit systems across the United States. Transit ridership dramatically fell at the beginning of the pandemic, and this graph shows Metro Rail in blue and the Metro Bus ridership, monthly ridership in red. And you can see it trends upwards since April of 2020. However, it's still well below the 2019 level, pre-pandemic levels. Looking at ridership on a fiscal year basis, it just reinforces that point. This shows that in 2021, you can see that the level was less than half of the prior years. And even in 2022, the expectation is that ridership will continue to improve, but will not be anywhere close to pre-pandemic levels. That translates into the performance measures that are looked at for transit. And 4 of them are shown here with revenue miles, passengers per revenue mile, then operating cost per revenue mile, and operating cost per passenger trip. And with decreased passengers riding the service, that makes the cost of each trip more expensive, since there are fixed costs for operating the system. And you can see that in these large upward bars for the operating cost per passenger trip. Similarly, passengers per revenue mile shows a big decrease in both Metro Rail and Metro Bus. That also translates into fare box recovery rates. While WMATA has, in the past, you could see fairly good fare box recovery rates, especially for rail, once the pandemic hit and the full impacts were felt in 2021, those rates plummeted. Looking at the agency overview of spending, this pie chart shows both the capital and the operating budgets for WMATA, and the smaller slices show the Maryland share for each piece. So Maryland share of the capital is about 14%, and for the operating is just under 20%. The 2023 WMATA budget has some assumptions built in. There is the use of nearly $716 million in federal stimulus funding that helps replace lost revenue, and we'll see that in a minute in another exhibit. There are also continuation of fare and schedule changes that were implemented the previous year or in the current year. And it also assumes the opening of the second phase of the Silver Line service, which adds $40.8 million to the subsidy requirement. Maryland's share of that is $13.5 million. Looking at 2023 operating for WMATA, total of $2.3 billion. And this exhibit shows the breakout by category. As in all transit systems, personnel is the largest operating expense and also shows the largest increase from 22 to 23 at 9.3%. This exhibit 7 shows how the operating budget is funded. On the left, the green shows the operating revenues and federal aid. In prior years, essentially operating revenues was the entire left side of the pie. And it's the difference between what WMATA can raise in its own revenues and the total cost for operations. The difference between those two is picked up as a subsidy by the 3 funding jurisdictions. But with COVID, federal aid has stepped in to help replace the lost revenue that we saw coming in from the fare box recovery rate. And so you can see here that for fiscal 2023, federal aid is actually going to account for nearly 31.5% of the operating, covering the operating costs. Turning now to the PAYGO program, there are a couple components to the PAYGO program. Chapter 351 and 352 of 2018 established a dedicated grant for WMATA to help address the backlog of capital needs, state of good repair, et cetera. That's a $500 million per year from the 3 funding jurisdictions. Maryland's share of that is $167 million. The other part of the capital program from Maryland's perspective is the base capital grant going to WMATA. Chapters 351 and 352 also have provisions that just kick in for the first time in fiscal 2023. Those provisions state that should WMATA provide certain reports and data and the Department of Transportation certify in writing to the governor prior to the beginning of the fiscal year that the information has been received, then the base capital grant for WMATA from Maryland also becomes a mandated appropriation. And as I indicated, this is triggered for the first time in 2023. Exhibit 8 shows the Maryland Consolidated Transportation Program components that make up Maryland's share of the capital grant. The first 3 lines comprise the base capital program. It's important to note that this first line includes federal funds that are received directly by WMATA, and therefore on the bottom I've broken out the first 3 lines, the state funds only, and it shows that the mandated amount does increase by 3% per year in the CTP as required by chapters 351 and 352 of 2018. Over the 6 years in the Maryland CTP, the total state appropriation is projected to be nearly $2.2 billion. Looking at WMATA's 6-year capital program, this shows how the funding is expected to play out, with debt covering 42%, local contributions from Maryland, Virginia, and DC accounting for another 41%, and federal funds providing 16% over the 6-year period. Looking at the 2023 WMATA capital program, it totals $2.4 billion. This shows the categories of expenditure with rail cars, systems, tracks, et cetera. Those total, the actual construction totals $2.3 billion, but each year we need to add in the loss of revenue from ongoing capital projects such as station closures and then debt service for debt issued to support the capital program is added in to get to that $2.2 billion level. And then Exhibit 11 shows how that 2.4 is funded from federal, state, and local and other sources. The right-hand column shows the Maryland pieces for each of these areas. Totals $343 million in the WMATA proposed budget, which is $4 million less than is actually contained in the Maryland allowance, which is shown also in this Exhibit 12, which compares the proposed budget from the Maryland allowance. Because the Maryland and the WMATA budgets aren't quite in sync time-wise, the WMATA budget will not be finalized until after the Maryland legislative session ends. There's always, some variation between what's included in the allowance versus what the proposed budget is. And you can see from Exhibit 12 that on the operating side, the Maryland allowance is $14 million less than is anticipated in the proposed budget for WMATA. That $14 million difference, though, is made up of the legislative exclusions. So the chapters 351 and 52 of 2018 did establish a cap on the subsidy contribution of allowing it to increase by 3% per year. And the Maryland operating grant of 338 is that capped subsidy amount. What is not in that amount are legislative exclusions, which WMATA is allowed to exclude any cost of service or equipment that's required by law, any capital projects that are approved by the board, and any payments related to legal disputes or proceedings. And those items for fiscal 2023 total $49.9 million. The largest piece of that is a $40.8 million piece for the Silver Line Phase 2 service, which I mentioned a few minutes ago. MDOT has advised that these legislative exclusions are part of the board's deliberation on the final budget, and when the final budget is approved by the board, at that point, MDOT will true up through a budget amendment if needed to bring in additional funds, the actual amount required for operating. Turning now to the issue section, the one issue raised in the analysis this year regards the 7000 series rail car return to service plan. As I'm sure everybody is aware, last October, a Blue Line train consisting of 7000 series rail cars derailed. An investigation showed that the cause of the derailment was the outward movement of both wheels on an axle and a wheel set of a rail car. WMATA instituted an inspection of all the 7000 series rail cars, but even prior to completing that inspection, the Washington Metro Rail Safety Commission did order WMATA to remove the 7000 series rail car from service. That inspection did find that there were an additional 20 wheel sets that did not make or meet specifications due to the outward movement of the wheels on the axles. WMATA began a return to service plan back in December of 2021. This was modified a couple times and then put on a 90-day hiatus in mid-January of this year as WMATA seeks to identify the root cause of the problem and to acquire technology to allow accurate measurement of the wheel sets. In order to help improve service with the removal of the 7000 series rail cars, because the 7000 series rail cars represent about 60% of WMATA's rail fleet, and taking them out of service caused a large increase in the headways, the time between one train leaving a station and the next train arriving. With fewer cars available, fewer trains could be run, and that just slowed everything down. Now, while pandemic ridership decreases has meant that the trains that are running have not generally been overcrowded, increased wait times does have a negative impact on ridership, and if this lasts for an extended period, could cause an additional downward pressure on future ridership in addition to that caused by the pandemic. We've asked WMATA to brief the committees on the efforts to install the wheel measurement technology I just mentioned, and also what the long-term impact of the service reductions might be and what actions it intends to take to correct those issues. The recommended actions for both the operating and the capital is to concur with the governor's allowance. And that concludes my presentation, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions for the analyst? Okay, Steve, thank you again. We will now turn to three agencies actually. As a reminder, we have with us Secretary Ports from the Maryland Department of Transportation, General Manager Wiedefeld from WMATA, as well as David Mayer, the Executive Director of the Washington Metro Rail Safety Commission, something this subcommittee has seen fit to invite for the past 3 years because of how important safety is to the mission of WMATA. I should obviously note that this is the General Manager's last appearance before this subcommittee, absent some special occasion. As he's announced he is retiring from WMATA within the next 6 months. Although it was noted to me earlier, he has not headed the Maryland State Highway Administration yet, so maybe we'll get him for another tour of duty, given his historic career in Maryland. We appreciate all his work. Obviously, he brought a great credibility to his role as General Manager of WMATA and has been there during a very difficult time. Some of those events were unavoidable. They're not WMATA's fault. Like COVID, and frankly, some are things that are really do lay at the footsteps of WMATA and some of the challenges there. So we look forward to hearing from him today. With that, I'll turn it over to Secretary Ports.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, Chair Corman and members of the subcommittee. For the record, I'm Jim Ports, Secretary of Maryland Department of Transportation. I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for accommodating us on the schedule, because like many of you, I had to bounce back and forth on different issues today at hearings. But as always, I want to thank the DLS budget analyst, Steve McCullough, for his professionalism and partnership throughout the year. Last year, quite frankly, it's been a tough year for transit systems nationwide, and Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, or WMATA, is no exception. Just as we thought, we're coming out of another year of this pandemic. 2 variants of COVID-19 virus emerged, once again forcing businesses to reassess the return of their workforce to the office, which is directly impacting transit use. Almost as quickly, the transit ridership started to recover. These variants dampened that growth, coupled with the derailment that sidelined the entirety of its newest rail cars. WMATA ridership took another hit just when the system was starting to see the riders return. Fortunately, as a result of the relief funding provided by the federal government, WMATA was able to insulate its workforce from significant resizing despite continuing revenue shortfalls, as Steve had mentioned. Now, however, the federal safety net is almost expended. As always, the state is committed to ensuring a safe and reliable transit system in the National Capital Region for our citizens and for all the riders in the WMATA system. This is why we are partners with the Commonwealth of Virginia and the District of Columbia to continue to invest significant public funding in WMATA's transit system. This funding subsidies the operations of Metro Rail, Metro Bus, WMATA, Paratransit Service, Metro Access. So for each and every one of these citizens who use Metro every day, we must ensure the system is safe, reliable, and available. Capital investment in the system is important for maintaining the state of good repair. And now in its 3rd year, dedicated capital funding provides WMATA with a guaranteed bondable funding resource. Maryland's contribution to this fund, combined with similar grants from the district and Virginia, provides WMATA with an annual $500 million to enter the bond market. These funds generate much needed assets to make critical capital and infrastructure improvements, recently generating over $1 billion towards WMATA capital improvement program. However, even these funds are reaching the end of their usefulness. In the next few years, the entirety of this grant will be obligated to covering the debt service payments that have resulted from WMATA's current and expected bond issuances. In the very near future, WMATA will need to make some tough decisions on how best to balance its expenses versus its revenue sources. And for the record, I will mention now that the department concurs with DLS's recommendations for the operating and the pay-go budgets. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce the person that you just mentioned, who will be responsible, at least for the next several months, for designing the path forward into the future of WMATA. Mr. Chairman, Paul Wiedefeld and I have worked together for many, many years when he was airport executive director, MTA administrator, and now WMATA. And I hate to see him go, but he's been a terrific manager of WMATA, and we are going to sorely miss him. I, as well as my predecessors, have enjoyed working very closely with Paul Wiedefeld as we work together to create a safe and reliable regional transit system. And with that, I'll turn it over to Paul Wiedefeld.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you for those comments. And Chairman Corman, thank you, and the other delegates. Paul Wiedefeld, the General Manager of Metro, for the record. If I could, I do have a few slides where I just wanted to hit on a few top line topics before taking any questions you have. If we could pull up those slides.
This is Cherie, you might need to give someone the ability to show their screen. Charlie Scott, are you going to be?
Charlie Scott here, if I could get permission.
Yep, just gave it to you.
Perfect.
Great, thank you. So 4 topics I wanted to hit on. One is the pandemic impact on Metro, which was talked about a bit. Overview of the 23 operating budget. Give an overview of the capital program, particularly sort of the history, particularly since the dedicated revenues that the Secretary just mentioned. And then some of the challenges and opportunities facing Metro in the region, just from my perspective. So in terms of the impact, first and foremost for us was to focus on our workforce. We were very fortunate. We had a pandemic plan in place, literally, that we pulled off the shelf, that we implemented in January 2 years ago, before this thing had really started to blossom to what we know it is today. So we were very aggressive in that, keeping our people safe. And as a result, roughly we have 97% of our workforce compliant with the vaccination and testing program we have. Those that aren't, we're progressing through discipline up to and including termination if they do not follow our rules. But I do want to note, tragically, we've lost 8 of our employees during this pandemic. So that's why it is so important that we do focus on our employees first, because clearly they're the ones that are out there providing the service. So I just wanted to get that across. But in terms of ridership, clearly, like other properties around the country, we've had a significant drop. This just gives you a sense of where we were pre-pandemic, with roughly 300 million passengers a year, and we've dropped down significantly, as Steve mentioned, in 21, starting to pull back a bit in 22, and we're projecting roughly a 53% return of passenger service in our 23 budget. This is interesting. This is the last 13 months. You can see the steady decline we were starting to have again in the scale. We're much further below where we were, but it was coming back. And then the Omicron really hit us hard, and you see that drop, and it's just starting to come back up. So yes, there were some service issues there. The 7,000, we had to reduce some of the bus service, but it started fairly early, just after October, where that started to come down as those issues started to play out in the community. So in terms of the operating budget, again, for the 23, we do anticipate the pandemic will continue to impact the region. As I mentioned, we are assuming a 53% recovery at pre-pandemic levels. The board has done a number of things to try to improve service enhancements and discounts on the fare side to stimulate ridership. And we actually have been successful so far in some of the things we tried on a pilot basis in our current budget, and will be permanent going forward. And the federal relief funding will support us through the fiscal year 23. As the Secretary just mentioned, though, in fiscal year 24, that's when that comes home to roost, that issue. In terms of the federal relief funding, we expect we have roughly 716 million that we're proposing for 23 budget. Leaves us about $150 million left in the federal side. And then so you get a sense, we have roughly almost a 500 million hole facing us sometime in the 24 budget, based on the assumptions we're all making today. Of course, that's going to change in a year's time as we put that budget together. But it gives you a sense of where we've been over the last few years, pre-pandemic to where we are today. Some of the initiatives that were launched by the board to try to stimulate ridership back. A weekend rail flat $2 flat rate fare that is generated roughly about 12 million additional passengers. Discounting, we would charge in effect another charge when you transfer from bus to rail. That was eliminated. And then a number of things on the pass side, and that's trying to recognize that the travel market isn't traveling 4 or 5 days per week. So a pass that was limited to time now spreads out further, so they don't lose. There's still the incentive to buy the pass, and we have sort of some of the dollars coming in advance. In terms of the capital program, this is an interesting slide because it shows sort of where we have been and where we're headed. And again, thank you for the dedicated funding, because that's really what has driven this slide. So if you look back in fiscal year 2015, which is just to the left of center here, we were asking in a budget request of roughly $1.2 billion. We were only delivering roughly $780 million. So we had a lot of internal issues that we had to address to get our delivery of the capital program in order. So we started to do that in fiscal year 16. We got up to roughly 84% delivery. And then the next 4 years, we were roughly at 99% delivery of the capital program. So what we were asking for, we were delivering, because that was several years ago, that was quite a complaint that we were leaving too much money on the table while we had these major needs that needed to be addressed. So we did focus on that very aggressively. And then you see, not only were we delivering what we're asking for, but the size of what we were asking for went up because we had the dedicated revenue. And as the Secretary mentioned, we were selling debt to get at some of these basic state of good repairs. In fiscal year 21, we've slipped a little bit. And to be frank, that's the function of both supply chain and COVID-related issues, staffing-related issues there. But we're still above 90% in the 21 budget. This gives you a sort of a longer view of what we've been doing with the funds that again, the legislatures in all 3 jurisdictions have given us. We started in 2016 with a backlog of state of good repair needs. And this is everything from our facilities to our systems, to our stations, tracks, and vehicles. So it's both bus and rail. And we had a backlog of roughly $7.1 billion. We've reduced that to $5 billion roughly in 18. And the current program brings that down to $3.2 billion, so over 50% drop. And with the additional federal money that we're getting and the money that we're still using with dedicated, we anticipate driving that down very low to about $1 billion mark in the year roughly 2030. The one that is lagging a bit is the systems, and a lot of that is because the investment in the systems are very large. And the work that it takes to get that ready to do, and then literally you're taking out an old system and putting in a new system. So that's why you don't see that part of the issue coming down until later in the out years, whereas you see more of a decline in other areas just because of the nature of the programming of the types of things. So you can buy buses and vehicles at a different pace. Here's just a short video of some of the projects we accomplished in 21. That was highlights from calendar year 21. So some of the things that are coming up in the capital budget for 23, again, is a budget of $2.3 billion, which is almost triple where we were several years ago. And again, part of this larger program that we're doing. And we will complete phase 4 of the platform improvement projects. I know that we were doing initially a number of them in Virginia. We did a number in Maryland last year. And this upcoming year, we'll be doing New Carrollton, Landover, and Cheverly. Those platforms, if you've experienced those, it's night and day, the difference. It's like a new station for people there, both customer and amenities and safety related issues. We will be doing major work on the Yellow Line Bridge and Tunnel, so that will have significant impact service levels as we have to get in there and do repairs for 30 plus year old parts of the system. We are pursuing new bus divisions at both Northern and Bladensburg. Northern is over 100 years old, and literally we had to shut that one down. The conditions were so dangerous. And the Bladensburg division, same thing. It's not quite that old, but very old, and it is our major bus division just inside of New York Avenue. And then on the fourth year of the capital program, again, that's all being supported again by the dedicated revenues that thankfully that the jurisdictions that Maryland gave us. So what does this mean? What do we get out of it besides some of these physical things you see? As you may recall, we had quite a bit of track-related issues that needed to be addressed. So we spent quite a bit of time and dollars in fixing those, and that's what the chart on the left is showing. One of the downsides of not having that maintained is arc and insulators. That was always a constant story in the press and for our customers. So we reduced that significantly across the board. And then we do a series of quality service sort of measures that we take a look at, and these are all generally moving in the right directions, whether it's elevators and escalators, the fleet reliability, and so on. And this is all on our website, so these are all things that you can easily access. So if I just wrap up with sort of some of the challenges and opportunities facing Metro and the region, clearly the pandemic is changing the travel patterns across the region, across the country, and across the region. And it has increased, I believe, the focus on those that don't have alternatives for travel. And we saw how important that was during the pandemic, when a lot of those people that literally were sort of the grease behind the wheels to make everything work in our society, whether it's in the hospitals, in our stores, at pharmacies. These were a lot of the people that were using our system. So you see the importance of them. So that is all changing that we have to start to wrestle with. A big issue is the financial structure that we're built on, which historically has been peak travel, and we charge a increased fare for peak travel, and we charge by distance. And those are the areas that we're hurting the most in terms of ridership loss. The people aren't coming in during the normal, rush hour periods, which again, we don't charge more for, and they're not coming from as far away, again, which we were collecting more revenue. So that is an issue that will need to be addressed going forward, as the Secretary mentioned. We also, I think during COVID and even before COVID, there was a recognition that the quality of service was inconsistent across the region. Certain parts of the community did not get the quality service that other parts did. And that was an equity issue that the board started to address 2 years ago before COVID even. I mentioned in Central Works and the low minorities, basically trying to get to some of those markets that we're looking forward to or looking to have to do. And then trying to make sure that the system serves the entire community. So those are big policy issues and eventually funding issues and big decisions that need to be made by the region, not necessarily by the transit agency. The transit agency has to obviously raise these issues, but at the end of the day, the region needs to come together and decide how they want to, what they see for the future of the system, and then how to support it going forward. So with that, I will answer the one question regarding the 7,000, if I may, just because it was a direct question, in terms of some of the technology that we're exploring. And so just so you know, the issue that we're dealing with the wheels sort of pulling apart, that is a symptom of a problem. It's not the problem. So we've got to figure out what is causing this to do this. One of the tools that we are exploring to make sure that we can mitigate whatever when we do find the root cause of this, is that the ability to, in effect, constantly measure what's going on what we call our trucks. The trucks are what hold the wheels to the body of the car, because it has to measure a number of things to see what's going on there. That's done traditionally by people regularly on a regular maintenance basis, and this would provide live sort of information of that. It's not done in the urban transit business. We had one of these technologies that we were starting to explore at Greenbelt in our yard prior to this issue. New York has one or two of these, I believe. It's what we call, it's in the class 1 railroad business, meaning the freight railroad business. They use those. but traditionally hasn't been used in the transit business. So the question was, what are we doing? So we have basically created an emergency contract to bring these in, start to test them. And we feel that'll be part of the solution to bring the 7Ks back. Obviously, that'll have to be tested and approved by the WMSC for its value. But we also, we think, and not only us, but NTSB and other entities that we're dealing with, feel that that's a very good step in the right direction. We start moving on that now and not wait till the end and then have to go through a whole procurement and installation process later. So that's the answer to that question. So obviously, we agree with the recommendations of the legislative analysts. With that, take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Wiedefeld. Before we do questions, and big shock, I have a few. Why don't we go with the Washington Metro Rail Safety Commission and Mr. Mayor.
Sure. Thank you so much, Chairman Corman, and to all the delegates who are with us today. The Washington Metro Rail Safety Commission is the independent state safety oversight agency for the WMATA rail system. We're guided by Maryland members Deborah Farrar-Dyke and Suhair Al-Khatib and the rest of our commissioners in accordance with our interstate compact that was approved by Maryland, Virginia, and the District of Columbia. The compact created our agency in 2017 after years of work by each of the jurisdictions. After the appointment of commissioners, hiring of staff, and establishing our agency oversight program, we assumed direct safety oversight of Metro Rail in March 2019. We approach our safety oversight work in a collaborative and transparent manner. Our website, wmsc.gov, now contains 145 safety event investigation reports, more than 370 inspection reports, and the reports of 9 comprehensive WMSC safety audits of WMATA that we've completed to date. Our website also includes the first 2 independent financial audits for the WMSC, and I'm proud that both of those audits resulted in clean opinions. The WMSC is funded with equal shares from each of the 3 jurisdictions along with federal grants. Maryland's share in fiscal year 2022 was $812,030. We are currently working with the Maryland Department of Transportation, Virginia, and the District of Columbia to finalize the jurisdictional share of our budget for fiscal year 2023, which begins on July 1st. That's our fiscal year. Your investment in the WMSC has led to tangible safety improvements for Metro Rail. For example, our focus on deficiencies in the Rail Operations Control Center has led to new management in that facility and an increase in the number of certified rail controllers. And our station inspections have resulted in Metro Rail coordinating across departments to repair fire life safety equipment. We use our enforcement authority when necessary, and we conduct oversight using our direct access to Metro Rail systems as provided in our compact. Most prominently in recent months, we responded to the October 12th derailment of a 7000 series train on the Blue Line between Roslyn and Arlington Cemetery stations. The NTSB is leading that investigation, and we're actively participating. As a result of our oversight work and information gathered during the investigation, all of the 7000 series rail cars are being kept out of passenger service under our orders until Metro Rail develops and implements a plan to safely return each 7000 series car to service. The investigation identified that on the axle that derailed, the wheels had moved outward, and Metro Rail conducted special inspections after the derailment that identified 20 other 7000 series rail cars with wheels too far apart. It also told us for the first time that routine inspections in the 12 months leading up to the derailment found 21 instances of wheels too far apart and similar failures dating back to 2017. On October 17th, after Metro Rail said it had removed from service all rail cars that had failed the special inspections, our independent oversight identified that Metro Rail had at least 2 of these failed rail cars in use, carrying passengers. We then ordered Metro Rail to remove all 7000 series cars from passenger service until they developed and implemented a plan under our oversight to safely return each car to service. Metro Rail submitted its plan to us on December 11th. 3 days later, we communicated to Metro Rail that we had no technical objections to the plan. On December 29th, again using our direct access to Metro Rail systems, we identified that Metro Rail had put at least 5 rail cars into service that did not comply with its plan. We notified Metro Rail that it had cars carrying passengers that did not comply with its safety plan, and Metro again removed all 7000 series rail cars from passenger service. we issued another order requiring Metro, this one, to keep the cars out of service until WMATA developed and implemented a revised return to service plan with additional protections to ensure the plan is followed. We look forward to Metro Rail developing its new plan to return service, and when a new plan is in place, we'll closely monitor its implementation as we did for the prior plan. In closing, our audit, inspection, investigation, and other work has led to required safety improvements for Metro Rail, and it's up to WMATA to implement and sustain those improvements. The WMSC, of course, oversees the implementation. Thank you, and I look forward to any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. If my colleagues have questions, please use your raised hand function. I'll get started. I do have a few, and again, to our Metro and WMSC witnesses, I know you've had a long day of testifying for legislative bodies, given the hearing in the U.S. House, but I think there are some things we need to cover in a little bit of detail. I'll start with kind of an easy one for the general manager, which is a lot of people are asking about your successor. I'd actually like to reverse the question a little bit. If you could go back 6 years, what would you tell yourself then that you wish you had known based on your experience now?
Not much more than I told myself then, to be frank. That to do this job, you've got to be transparent, you've got to be direct, you've got to be ready to make some hard decisions. And that if you don't come at it with that attitude, I think it's almost a disservice to the agency and to the region. So that would be, sort of the way I approached it, and I would hope that that's the approach that a new general manager would have, because the issues that we face, they can't be solved alone, and some of these are complex. We've had a system that was, just ignored for quite a bit. Was brand new, and we weren't investing to the level that needed to be invested, and we paid the price for it. And so I don't think we want to slip back into that. So I think just being transparent, open, and communicate the best you can throughout it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Although, frankly, I'm hoping you can think of some things maybe you have learned in the 6 years. Although I know you made a lot of tough decisions, especially those early days with the stand down. But I'm hard pressed to believe that you haven't learned things in these 6 years, given the dynamic leadership you've brought. I'm skeptical of that.
I have, but maybe that's a conversation you and I could have at a different time.
Okay, well, let's talk about the 7,000 series rail cars. Obviously, a lot to talk about there. I want to start with some of the things that WMSC was just talking about, which is after, and I know that you were not aware until basically the derailment, you personally, when I say you, I mean you, I don't mean the WMATA, the acronym. We're not aware of the problems until the Blue Line derailment. But I want to talk about after that period and before now, this period of time where cars were being put back on the system, even though they weren't complying with the checks that had been agreed to. Can you just sort of describe how that happened?
Yeah, I think the measurements we were taking are 1/32, and we were doing that with people throughout, the system. And to be frank, that's not a good way to do it. That's what we learned. So people were making mistakes on something that was barely visible by the eye. We were using a rod, which is in the standard of the business. And that's why this electronics solution is the one that's much more, we believe, much more efficient and realistic of what to measure at that scale. So those were made, they shouldn't have been made. That's why the service was pulled down. We got to a point where we were going to face all the work we were doing to try to measure these wheels. We were going to get 5 train sets a day out of that. 5. Okay, that's roughly 40 cars out of 600 or 748. So that's when I said to the board, look, I got to pull this service down. This is ridiculous. We're spending so much time on these 5 sets of trains where we have this large issue. That's where we should be putting our focus. And if we have another hiccup where, for some reason the measurement isn't done right, we're going to go through this whole cycle again. So rather than come back with another plan for the MSC on this focused area, let's focus on the core issue. And that's what we're doing now.
Okay. And so this root cause analysis, is there a time frame in mind about when you might understand what's going on and then figure out how to correct what's going on?
What we've done is we brought in a company called TTCI. They are sort of the global sort of root cause analysis people in the rail industry. So they've come in with a work plan, which is roughly 90 days. So they feel that when they do it, it's sort of the medical profession. They collect lots of data and they start eliminating things that they can eliminate to zero in on what the issue is. And that's what they're in the process of doing. So they literally have taken thousands and thousands of data points and are measuring everything imaginable, looking at all the records they can, and they're starting to zero in on some issues. So their anticipation is that they will get to a point where they identify what I do think though, is they're not going to find a smoking gun. If there was an issue where we could say, okay, well, there it is, let's go fix that, that wrench or whatever it is. I don't think that's where they're going to land. They're going to find that, look, this is a complicated issue that we've got to then work through. And then once they do that, then we are going to have to create a testing plan to support that, run it through the MSC, obviously, and then get approval to bring it back. So we're in the middle of that right now. So I can't give you an exact date, but that's why we set the 90 days, because that was sort of the framework of their scope of work where they felt they could gather the data, come up with their hypothesis, what they think is happening here, test it, and then create the mitigation around that. So that's the process that we're in the middle of now. The hope is that we get through that in this 90-day period. We have a sense, okay, well, that's the issues we're going to mitigate. And now here's the process to do it. We'll have to obviously, again, get the MSC's approval to do it, whatever testing is associated with that. That'll play out, and then we'll get those cars back into service.
Okay, so it doesn't sound to me like when I start going back to my other job in mid-April that there's going to be 7,000 series rail cars running. This is
there may not be. I don't want to commit to it because we can't. But if there was something where, hey, there's something over here, there's a mechanical issue or there's a quality issue, then yes, we could get there much sooner. But I don't think, and I think Mr. Mayor would agree, that doesn't seem to be where this is headed. This seems it's a complex, very complex problem that we've got to understand with these cars, with our system, and how it's interacting. And that's where we're headed.
And I'll turn to Mr. Mayor on the same topic in 1 second, but I just have one more follow-up on the 7,000 series right now, which is it's been suggested to me that WMATA does not have an adequate asset management system, and that if it did, this issue might have been flagged earlier for people at higher levels. And in fact, some of the rail cars might not have even been accepted from the manufacturer. Do you have any comment on that?
I think yes, a better asset management system is good for lots of other things, not only this. But I think we do have to put this in context. Overall, we have roughly 3,000 sets of wheels. We were inspecting them every 90 days. Right. So that, and then we found in 17, roughly, I think the OIG just reported two wheels that were out of alignment. So the mechanical people treated it as a warranty issue. They got a brand new car. They have 2 of these out of thousands that are not hitting the standard. Get us the new wheel. There's something going on with your wheel or whatever reason. And that was, they were treating it as a warranty issue, not as a safety issue. And that's sort of led us to where we are today. Now, would it have been if we had an asset management system and this is where we are headed, which is what we need to do is take a look at a number of our facilities and equipment, and what are some of the potential safety related issues that could be caused if something fails in one of these. And now let's monitor those so it isn't just within the world of the mechanic, right? That it gets to our safety office, that it gets to WMSC, gets to our quality control group, and obviously to the general manager's office. So that is what is being put in place. But so it's a tie to an asset management, a very sophisticated asset management program. You're correct.
Okay, let me put it in the proper context for you. And I can't believe I have to say this. Over half of your cars are out of service for a safety reason, and the service is suffering as a result for the riders. That's the context we're in. Yeah. So if the context was that insignificant that it didn't matter, which is kind of what the beginning of your response made it sound like, we wouldn't be in that position. So please let's
it definitely, I apologize. No, I didn't mean to sound that way at all. It definitely matters. It definitely, I'm saying we didn't have the process in place to do that. That's my point. And that's what we're trying to create.
All right. I have some other issues I'd like to ask about, but let me ask Mr. Mayor if he has anything he'd like to add on the 7,000 series, since we have the benefit of him here.
Sure. I guess what I would say, not to rehash what I said in my remarks a moment ago, is just simply to say that we absolutely support Metro in its efforts to pause the return to service and its efforts to study the cause of the wheel spread on the axles. We speak almost every day. Our teams do as we move forward to understand that. We certainly also support Metro's interest in and attempts to acquire more precise measurement equipment to measure the wheel spread on the axle as accurately as it can be measured. I do have to add, though, that the plan to return to service the cars in December was approved only after our specific feedback about the accuracy of the analog tools that are in use, and only after Metro added specific protections to double check certain measurements. And it was because those procedures were circumvented and that those 5 cars, or at least 5 cars, were returned to service out of compliance with the approved plan. So I do just need to say that, but that's now history, and looking forward, we look forward to Metro's next return to service plan. It will have additional protections to make sure that that doesn't happen in the future, and we look forward to working together to implement that plan.
Great. I see Delegate Metzger has a question. Delegate Metzger.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just a plain spoken person. So if we have half the cars that's in not repair or out of service for safety, what do we need to do to get these back in service? Anybody can answer.
What we need to understand is what caused them to go out of service and then correct that issue. That's what we're trying to get to.
How soon can we get that answer?
We're looking within the 90-day time frame to try to get our handle around that.
Okay. Can you kind of give me a report how that's going?
It's going, I would say, and David, you can chime in as well, but I think fairly well, because we've eliminated not a lot of things, because again, it's a very complex problem. So we're eliminating things that aren't worth the focus, and we're zeroing in some, in effect, things that we think are the problem. So that's where it is, but it's very data intensive to get to that point.
If you wouldn't mind, sir, can you keep me in the loop of things on that? Of
course. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Delegate Metzger. I should have gone with you first and we could have saved a lot of time maybe. Let me ask about another issue of ongoing concern, which is the Rail Operations Control Center. Mr. Wiedefeld, could you just provide an update on the staffing and safety of the ROC?
Yes, so that has been, I think that is a good news story, and I think David will agree. That's been totally revamped. We have new leadership there. We have the Rail Operation Control Centers, the controllers themselves. We're up to over 50, I believe, right now, and we're aiming towards 60 of those, which allows us to do a lot of other things in terms of reducing the stress on those people. That total shop has been totally redone, to be frank. And it's been a year-long effort almost now that we've done that, and I think it's going very well. And I believe David's, I know they're doing an audit of it and continue to keep a close eye on it. And I think it's going in the right direction very strongly. And Mr. Mayor could comment as well.
No, I totally agree with what you just said. I'm very pleased, and I thank you personally for your attention to it, and would make the suggestion that you whisper in the ear of your successor that it will need their attention to make sure that the progress that's been made sticks, and that the other corrective actions that are needed there continue to be worked and implemented. But I share your characterization. Success story.
Great. I hope that's all accurate. That'd be very positive news. If so, let me ask on the capital side. Again, a somewhat positive story there. In particular, I credit you for getting the program back on track. There was that year where it was only 2/3 were being spent while people were asking for more money, which was a very strange situation. So thank you on that. You mentioned systems being sort of the big thing that needs to be taken on next. Can you just sort of briefly describe what that includes?
The system that basically, there's a few, but the big one is the rail system. The system that basically controls the movement of those cars is a technology pretty much from the 60s and 70s, is the reality. And even to get the parts and different things of that, to keep that in the shape it needs to be done, you can't get them. So we have to move to a new system, and it's very expensive. endeavor to do that. And Mr. Mayor and I have talked about it, the need to start to think about what that looks like. But we have the same types of issues with our fare system, for instance. The back office for the fares. The technology has changed so much over the years. We have to replace old systems and bring in new ones just to keep up. So it's those types of those are examples of it.
Thank you. Could you comment on the timing of the opening of phase 2 of the Silver Line, as well as, given the diminished state of the rail car inventory, how service is going to be provided?
Yeah, the rail car, that will not be an issue, the rail car, because again, in the scale of the operation is relatively small. So that won't be an issue. In terms of its opening, we're in the final stages of reviewing as you know, this is an airport project. The Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority is building the project. We're in the final stages of reviewing the work that they've done before we, in effect, would accept it. And we would then do roughly a 90-day, in effect, dry run testing of the facility. So we're getting very close to that. So if that is the case, we're probably sometime late spring, early summer for that to start service.
Thank you. At your hearing this morning, one of the witnesses talked about a bike project, I believe it was the East Falls Church, that took 5 years to put in. Are you familiar with that project? And can you explain the story there? It's actually one that's been tweeted at me many times over the years. Whenever I've tried to say anything nice about Metro, that's one that's thrown in my face, if you have any.
Yeah. Vaguely, again, it was something that apparently took a lot of years to unfold. I believe there were a lot of back and forth on the design issues, which maybe caused some of the cost overruns on that. There were some contractor issues that caused that. It was just a very bad project from a number of perspectives, and that played out the way it did. But obviously, from our perspective, to make sure that people manage these things tightly. But I think it was a lot of players in that, to be frank.
Okay. One of my colleagues raised concerns about construction equipment being stored in a parking lot at a site in Prince George's County that was apparently from a project over the summer. We reported it to Metro, and you all touched base with the contractor who said they'd get it out within 2 or 3 weeks. I didn't know if they were paying rent for the use of that space, but I guess I'm trying to understand why construction equipment from a project that was completed over the summer would be sitting in a Metro parking lot, and then it would take weeks to get that equipment that doesn't belong there out of the parking lot, so people who actually want to park and ride can use those spaces. Do you have any feedback on that?
I just don't know that issue. I can look into it, sir.
Great. As you all are looking at the budget situation, I recognize this will probably be your successor and not you. Has there been any discussion of restoring the turnbacks that many of us advocated eliminating on the red line?
There's been no discussion at that level yet.
Terrific. Very close to home for me, the Bethesda station has a number of leaks into the mezzanine level of the station that have been there for a very long time and are very unpleasant for the people who are riding the system. Do you know the status of repairing those leaks? They've also had the effect of shorting out the fare card boxes that are there as well.
I will follow up to find out the status of that.
Great. On a similar topic, as I know you're familiar with this one, there's been a lot of water infusion into the Red Line tunnel, basically between Friendship Heights and Medical Center. I think you helped innovate the use of what I'll call a goo to try to solve that. Could you just provide an update on that and how that's working?
Yeah, so we did a pilot program. We actually used the technology they use in deep mining, basically. So that has worked very well, actually. So we're expanding that program and making it a program going forward. Again, these are things that will take years to continue to do. As you know, that part of the tunnel is under the water table. So it's constantly under that type of pressure. It was an old technology of how they built tunnels at the time. So it is something that is not going to go away, because unless we build a tunnel within a tunnel to solve it as we would solve today, or as we would build today. So we'll have to do that, but it's been very successful in reducing that. And part of that is because you don't see the incidents in the arcing insulators because the water's being drained.
Terrific. Thank you. I'm always happy to hear about a success story. One more project specific, which is the second entrance to the White Flint station. Are you familiar with that project and where that stands?
I don't off the top of my head. I apologize.
Great. I look forward to getting follow-up from Regina on that one. My last question is for both you and Mr. Mayor, which is just, prior to the 7000 series, which has obviously been very much in the news, you would occasionally hear some kerfuffles between the two acronyms about some of the work going on. And I just want to get an update about how you all were, and I don't mean you two specifically, obviously you two seem to get along quite well, but how the two acronyms are cooperating with each other on some of the ongoing issues. For example, WMSC's ability to do real-time monitoring of things at WMATA, the situations like that that were being talked about before the 7000 series issue.
I mean, I'll just start. I think we can do a lot better. And I think some of it falls, a lot of it probably falls on us, but I think it's a two-way street as well.
And I absolutely agree. There's room for improvement all around. We had friction associated with both of our names over a couple of issues last year. Both of those issues, one had to do with closed circuit television, the other had to do with certain records and a fitness for duty audit. But almost suggest we don't even go into detail on those matters because both of them are settled issues, and we're moving forward. And as you've observed, Paul and I have a very good working relationship, and we're doing everything in our power. I think I speak for both of us in attempting to push that cooperation and good working relationship down just as far as we can in both of our organizations.
Great. Well, I appreciate all three of you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for being here and your work on the WMATA board. Mr. Wiedefeld, once again, we appreciate your long history of service to Maryland and the region. As I said, State Highway Administration is still open for you if you are looking for one more tour of duty, although the current administrator, Tim Smith, is doing a terrific job. And Mr. Mayor, thank you for being here. Obviously, this is an issue of great importance to me. Frankly, I've basically staked my legislative career on WMATA's success. And so anytime I open the newspaper, I feel a real sense of disappointment, and I'm kind of tired of feeling that way, just to be totally honest with all my colleagues and everyone on this video. So thank you, colleagues. I think we can now move to our third and final agency of the day, which is the Maryland Environmental Service, and our panelist, Andrew Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You should be seeing the operating budget summary for the Maryland Environmental Service. Just to summarize the overall picture for Maryland Environmental Service, it is a fee-for-service organization that does work for the state in terms of its revenues and expenditures between fiscal 2020 and 2021. It did expand its revenues, but expenditures kind of kept pace, and therefore you're seeing a decrease between the 2 years in terms of its overall operating income. In terms of the revenue sources for the Maryland Environmental Service, there are two agreements that basically kind of govern how the state works with, or Maryland Environmental Service worked with the state for reimbursable projects. Those are projects where they largely operate water and wastewater treatment plant operations. The two components are the executive order and the Board of Public Works action or directive. And it also has other engagements with the state as well on direct contracts. In terms of the overall picture for funding, you see around 94% of its funding comes from the state and local governments combined. In terms of the revenue by business activity type, you see three components or three major activities there. Dredging, solid waste, and water and wastewater operations consists of around 65% of its overall work. In terms of the revenues by business activity changes between fiscal 20 and 2021, solid waste management increased by around $5.7 million. This is due to the Prince George's County Materials Recycling Facility work that the Maryland Environmental Service was doing. It also sees around a $1.9 million increase for water and wastewater operations due to additional activities in that particular sector. There's around a $4.6 million decrease for environmental dredging and restoration. And that basically affects the Cox Creek expansion project winding down. In terms of the operating expenses between 22 and 23 now, around $2 million increase for salaries, wages, and fringe benefits based on a 3% COLA. You also see a little bit of an increase for contractual services, $1.1 million, and land structures for about $1.3 million. In terms of the revenue generating services, so this is one of the components of MES's work. You have the fee for service component, which is the reimbursable projects. You also have various revenue generating services in terms of products they also provide as well. So you're seeing here, and just kind of highlight, the geospatial engineering services reflects a significant increase in revenue between fiscal 2020 and 2021. This is due to Smart Pond work that it is doing with State Highway Administration and other partners. However, MES was not able to recover the full amount of the work that it's been doing in terms of its overhead expenses. And so you see an overall reduction in, or a deficit in a sense, for that particular service in fiscal 2021. Fiscal 22, Maryland Environmental Service basically had unearned monies around $1.7 million. So this is a refund that would then occur in fiscal 22. MES plans to provide $80,000 back to the Department of Natural Resources based on work that was budgeted for, but then came in under budget. But it would like to retain around $1.7 million in a new Eastern Correctional Institution Energy Upgrade Project Fund. This would be a fourth project reserve fund that MES would have. This is project reserve funds, are basically a way to store excess money that was budgeted in particular that was not used, but is needed for particular projects. And therefore, the flexibility is provided for by allowing MES to retain some of that money in these particular funds, which are then transparent to the General Assembly, excuse me. This new fund actually is slightly different. It was created in December 2021, and this fund, within the authority that MES has, retains funding from a bunch of different projects, and not just this kind of single project to single project fund transfer. So this could reflect a number of different projects. The funding is being retained for the purpose of addressing some shortfalls, cash shortfalls for contracting for an energy upgrade project at Eastern Correctional Institution. This is the natural gas pipeline trunk line that's going to be expanded to be over to Maryland Environmental Service. This is the component reflected here, and there's also a component that takes the natural gas pipeline over to the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. So they'd like to retain some more money in this particular brand new fund in order to be able to address some of those kind of cost overruns for contracting for that work. In terms of the reimbursable projects operating expenses changes between fiscal 22 and 23, it's around $1.1 million is for that 3% COLA that was discussed earlier, the major component of that. And then for the reimbursable projects, just kind of scroll down a little bit here, between 22 and 23, there are two large projects in terms of the funding increase around $1 million for each. Central Maryland Correctional Facility is a new project being added for fiscal 23. And then you have the ECI cogeneration facilities, Correctional Institution cogeneration facility. And what this is actually part of that overall natural gas pipeline project. They're finding that the natural gas that they're using for that facility as they're converting it from wood chips to natural gas is actually more expensive than the wood chips were. So there's an increase in cost there as well. In terms of personnel data, you're seeing no change between the years reflected here for positions. In terms of issues, the first one concerns Chapter 72 of 2021. This bill was an oversight bill, requires a number of changes in the governance and administration of the Maryland Environmental Service due to concerns that were brought to light as a result of a severance package and retaining of funding and resources from Maryland Environmental Service by a former executive director. So bill has a number of components to it. MES was required to submit a report by the end of December 2021, which it has done. There are four main components of that report. First part was the policies, as MES adopted or readopted the policies required by the deadline set, and it has, according to the report. The independent assessment of the board was another component. This is having a private consultant come and take a look at the board's actions and provide any recommendations on improvements. And the board, the private consultant was able to provide that information, December 2021 meeting. There are a number of components laid out here in terms of how to address how to make the board even more of a functioning entity than it was before. There's a Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act reporting requirement as well, provided for in the report or in the legislation, excuse me. And finally, there was additional information required that was provided by separately outside of the reporting requirement as reflected here in terms of the new board. Was a new board installed? It was. New diversity officer was hired, and as noted, the rest of the items here. One item I'd like to focus on is the audit. The audit is required to focus on unauthorized spending, misallocated expenses, and lack of conformity with state law or Maryland Environmental Service Board policies. That was expected to be completed by March 22. The Department of Legislative Services recommends MES comments on that audit if they're willing to do that. It's not in the comment there, but it would be a nice addition. And then to talk about the independent assessment of the board in terms of the development of a 5-year strategic plan and a charter and bylaws for the board as well. They're expected to be all completed by the end of 2022. In terms of the second issue, this one concerns Joint Chairman's report committee narrative that was in last year's joint chairman's report. First component here is undesignated unrestricted net assets. It's sort of its MES's balance. It's a kind of fund balance, as it were. So MES is actually reflecting a fairly substantial increase in its fund balance, around $4.3 million to $6.7 million for the time period going forward, fiscal 21 to fiscal 23. But really, this reflects an accounting change in terms of the inclusion of MES's equipment fund in this calculation. It doesn't reflect any kind of shift in policy in any way. In terms of the overhead rates, MES has a number of overhead rates that provide for the revenues, to allow for it to do its work. The exhibit 8 reflects the trends in those overhead rates over the years. The general administrative rate, the blue rate at the very top there, has stayed about the same over time. There is a general hope that that rate would come down and provide for more efficiency in terms of MES's operations as it expands its scope. Potentially would have more projects than in sense overhead costs. We haven't necessarily seen a huge decrease or change in that overhead rate. And that would be nice to see, because that would obviously reduce the cost to the state agencies that contract for work or do work for the reimbursable projects as well. One of the major changes is the water and wastewater rate, reflected here in red. And that has come down substantially over the years, from around 14.62% to around 5.62% in the 2023 unaudited statements. So that's an actual an extreme help to the state in terms of the cost, because there's a lot of management work, a lot of personnel work associated with the activities in that particular category of work it does for the state, and that rate coming down therefore helps the state. In terms of some other components, the project reserve funds we talked about a little bit earlier. There's a brand new one that's created in order to be able to address the energy project overruns, cost overruns they're experiencing. And you'll see that basically right here in the exhibit, reflecting that $1,659,000 that the the Department of Budget and Management has authorized Maryland Environmental Service to retain that funding in this particular new project reserve fund for the purposes noted. So the recommended actions in this particular item, DLS recommends a community narrative be adopted, continuing that reporting requirement. And the overall operating budget recommended actions are to provide for that funding statement going forward. Unless there are any questions, that concludes the presentation.
Thank you, Andrew. Any questions for the analyst from my colleagues? I do not see any. With that, we can turn to the agency. We're pleased to be joined by the chair of the MES board, Judge Frederick Smelkin, as well as the executive director of MES, Dr. Charles Glass. Let me just say, as an introductory matter, I've been watching the MES board meetings, not the committee meetings, just the board meetings, because I need something to do really late at night when I can't sleep, and just really appreciate the openness that Dr. Glass has brought to those meetings and the transparency that he's been trying to deliver in light of what we've seen prior to his tenure. So really appreciate that, and appreciate Chair Schmalkin's work shepherding the board through that process as well. With that, let me turn it over to you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Chair Corman, and thank you for introducing Chair Judge Schmalkin. Thank you to members of the subcommittee. For the record, I'm Charles Glass, Executive Director of the Maryland Environmental Service, and I have some other colleagues that are here today if we need them to pinch in and answer any questions. But first, I'd really like to thank Andrew Gray and the entire DLS team for their thorough work on MES's operating and capital budgets, but today the operating budget. Mr. Gray is top notch, and we appreciate his professionalism throughout the budget development process. MES provides the following responses to the 2 requested questions, and the third add-on, as far as the audit, I can answer that one as well. In regards to the independent assessment performed by RSM and the development of a 5-year strategic plan and charter and bylaws, with reference to the strategic plan, I did notice last summer that we were going to be coming up on our 5-year end of the strategic plan by my predecessor, and started talking about it and engaging then. We really got it kicked off in November, and that process is ongoing, including a SWOT analysis. We're performing a survey and SWOT analysis by both our teammates. So a survey went out this week to our teammates, and last week we sent out a survey to selected clients, and we hope to get successful responses from them. The board has been presented the basic plan for that strategic plan in our board meetings, and I plan to continue to update them on a monthly basis. We have the current schedule of having a draft. We intend to have a draft to the board by April, and that would give them 3 full months to evaluate. And we'll have a 5-year strategic plan in place for July 1 for FY23. Charters and bylaws, MES is working with the MES Principal Counsel on this matter. Judge Schmolken and Principal Counsel have been discussing this issue, and the board chair has indicated it is a priority to complete it. And this task will also be completed by the end of the year. As far as the unintended, well, unaudited, I can't remember the term, Mr. Gray, but that extra audit, our annual audit is complete. It was submitted. So our annual general gap audit. We do have a second audit that is related to executive expenses, and that's being presented to the audit committee this month. That has been resolved. So 1, 2, RSM is doing all of them. They have been our auditor for a few years now. And they also had a consulting arm to do the assessment. So we've leaned heavily on RSM, and they wanted to come up with, because they do a sample analysis of the audit information in our general audit, there was some back and forth between our managing director of finance and the VP that does the work for RSM, and they've come to the selection of the information that they will be validating and verifying through analysis. And that audit will be concluded as we project by March as well. So multiple audits. We also have the federal single audit that's performed annually, and that also is due soon. But the big audit before the end of the fiscal year, before the session starts, is the audit that then that data is then culled for these other separate audits. Just to clarify. On the second question, the recommendation that the committee narrative be adopted, requesting MES to continue to provide a funding statement, information on undesignated, unrestricted net assets, overhead rate, project reserves, fund status, justification for reimbursable project funding changes. MES concurs with the analyst's recommendation. And with that, if you'd like to hear from Judge Schmolken or any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Judge Schmolken, please, if you have any comments, now would be a perfect time.
Well, yes, I do. Thank you very much. Sarah, we appreciate your talking to us and our ability to talk to you. The first thing that happened when I came into the situation was that obviously there was going to be some change. You and other members have changed that with statutory stuff, and we have read all of the statutory stuff, and we paid attention to it, and we got it to you in time. So I think that I must say that the people that we worked with from Judge Glass not Judge Glass, but well, he's PhD, yeah, Dr. Glass, on down to everybody involved that I have come into contact with MES, just been fantastic people. They know a lot about what they are doing. They are considerably know in every possible way you can, water and land, and how important it is to keep it safe and clean. And they are doing it. I also want to say that the people that came in July of 2021, who are just fantastic people, all have some kind of relationship with what we are doing. And we have them from Kent County out to Garrett County. I think that's where Mr. Witt is, Garrett County. So we're all across the board, and also down and around Montgomery and Prince George's. And we are testing everything from beginning to end of Maryland to get it all right as well as we can to take care of the people of the state of Maryland. So with that, unless you have any questions, sir, I'd be try to answer them all. I've got to tell you that my experiences with land and water were in 1967 and 8 when I was a deputy game warden of the Game and Inland Fish Commission, which many of you probably don't remember. I remember it. So I learned a lot there, but it's rather on a different plane now. I'll put it that way, sir.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for being here, and thank you to MES and the board and the staff for the commitment to fulfilling the bipartisan requirements of the MES Reform Act. And Dr. Glass, I've actually encouraged some of the other, what I'll call quasi-state agency heads to talk to you about it, because the governor proposed a bill that includes many of the requirements, and not all of what was applied to you all to them. And there have been questions about that. And I've encouraged them to talk to you both about the process, but also I recall there was a contracting issue with actually getting the independent board assessment, for example. So hopefully you can be a resource for them. I did want to ask, Andrew, in his analysis, discussed the contingency for the ECI that you all were taking. Could you just sort of, first of all, confirm my understanding, which is that this is kind of the first time you all have reallocated like that internally to create a contingency, but really why that contingency is necessary, what's going on with that product that's necessitated the change?
So yes, of course. And thank you for the comment. Any requests from other quasi agencies, I'd be happy to entertain them. I've talked to a couple that I have a close relationship with. The ECI project has to be described as both the natural gas pipeline that's been completed down US 13, a trunk pipeline that will go into the cogeneration facility on the plant, the changing of all of the equipment inside of that facility, so from wood burning to natural gas burning, and all of the computer controls that go with it, and then a new steam line that at least goes to the fence line into the complex. So unlike other capital program projects, which from my MDOT experience and from our relationship on the capital program for water wastewater, there was never a single large appropriation for the project for a long 4 or 5 year period of a capital project. So MES, from prior to my arrival, it was being structured piece by piece by piece. And as everyone knows, with inflation over the last year and a half, there's been a drastic change in the price of a lot of things, including wood chips, by the way, which have doubled in price. But also with the actual installation of the new boilers and the control equipment. And then there have been delays with code changes that's going before the BPW next week. And those individual contracts all increased in price. So we not only have this, just to be clear, we not only have this request that DBM has approved and is now before you, but we also have a $7.2 million capital deficiency related to this project. So total project costs has grown to 16 million, just as other capital projects have grown in costs over the last year.
Great. And then just again, is this the first time that you know of that MES has created its own sort of contingency like this out of other funds? Or
from my attorney general, my principal counsel's history, no, this is not the first time MES has for a project created a fund. It may be the first time that those funds came from various parts of the state reimbursable, but it's not the first time a contingency was made for a project that had changes in cost.
Great. Sticking mostly with ECI, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act report, which I know is an annual requirement. I appreciated the report. I read through it. How do you factor in projects like ECI in that report, which is, making a long-term investment? It might be an upgrade for the particular facilities that are going to tap that energy, but obviously it's a long-term fossil fuel burning upgrade you've put in place. How do you sort of account for that in your Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act report?
So as the project, my first week on the job went before BPW, I faced challenging questions from former State Treasurer Kopp. And she asked for commitments, and she then became a board member. And I talked with her extensively about the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act report that we wrote and all things MES. There's a transition that has to come in the world where we look at what is sustainable and renewable energy. And there are arguments in the state by advocates from different directions on what is sustainable. So an example is, if a landfill produces natural gas, is that good or bad? Some would say if that natural gas is captured and compressed and used in vehicles for fuel, it creates a circular, sustainable economy. You're taking a waste product that's buried in the land, and you're actually creating an energy source instead of getting that energy source from fracking or some other condition. If you take and do the natural process of anaerobic digestion, a natural process that happens in our soil, it happens wherever there is a loss of oxygen, there are anaerobes present, and actually there's groups of bugs, but all those microorganisms produce methane. If we do it with food waste, or if we do it with biosolids from a wastewater treatment plant, is that using another waste product and creating renewable energy, a sustainable process. So now this is where people get, and there's an argument. I'm not a legislator, don't play one on TV or anything, but if we have processes and pipelines for both, first, renewable natural gas, and this is where I made a commitment, and I followed through with that commitment made to State Treasurer Kopp, that I would support renewable natural gas in the state. And so for the better part of a year, the first year, as you well know, was busy with other things, but for the better part of the last year, I've been engaging with Bioenergy DevCo, and they have a food waste facility right off of 95 that's going into place. The same thing, there have been efforts and there are in the Maryland Department of Agricultural programs now that have generated anaerobic natural gas from anaerobic digestion of food waste, of ag waste, and that happens on a small scale throughout the state already. So the answer is natural gas versus renewable natural gas, and what portion, maybe it'll be taken out of the renewable portfolio standard, I don't know, but there is also steam reformation of natural gas to create hydrogen. So if you want to say that there will be hydrogen as our base fuel in the future someday, you need pipelines and you need the capability. You can take CH4, CH3 and clip off the carbon and make carbon dioxide for beneficial uses, commercial uses, and take the hydrogen and make hydrogen fuel. So I know that's a little bit long and maybe a little professorial, but my discussion with Treasurer Kopp, and she asked me for the commitment, will we work for that? And we have been, so.
Thank you. I hope you're taking care of her successor as treasurer as well. My last questions relate to some personnel issues. This committee had pretty epic disagreements with your predecessor about collective bargaining rights for MES. We did pass those rights, and we're told it was going to be the end of MES as we knew it. Do you have any update on the status of collective bargaining and MES employees?
We've received, so from my understanding, the employees would have to get together and engage with a union and then start that process. And as soon as they do, then we would, as the leadership of the organization, we would engage with them. And nothing has happened since that was put into the MES Reform Act, but there was interaction. ASME did write some letters to me, and I responded to them and took action. So, but other than that, nothing has occurred.
Thank you. And just similar issue. I know last month you all approved one-time bonuses and then raises for your personnel. I think the right thing to do given a lot of things going on in the economy and your ability to do so. I am curious if that went through one of your committees of the board before it was voted on by the full board. I only watched the full board meeting. So
because of the timing and because of the way the state was moving before our board meeting, I wrote a memo and asked the board for that, as you saw. So we did not, the normal process at MES would be to go to the HR committee, but because of the way it was timed, it was a surprise that the state was moving forward. Inflation has been critical, has been bad, and we have had an increase in our vacancies, especially for our lower wage earners. So, and actually we're actively working on our operator in training program, because we do have a graying of our operators, and it's hard to attract operators at the minimum wage that we hire at. And we've had, so last year, there were 200 contacts with potential operators, young people to come in and get the operator in training, and we only secured 14. So, and that's statewide. We need about 30 every year, just with retirements of our 150 licensed operators. All of our operators that run our facilities for the state parks, for the state reimbursable, are licensed. I got to make that clear, except for the ones that are in training. And so we have to find a way to incentivize. So that the board, now I do report to a board. Let's be clear. I work with Judge Schmoken. I report to the board. The board makes the decisions on things like salaries, wages, etc. But I do make recommendations as the executive.
Yeah, and let me just note that also you withdrew yourself and the deputy director from that pretty explicitly because of required separate board action. Appreciate that. Perhaps, first of all, you can send me the slide you showed of your operator in training starting rate versus others, because I think that's pretty good. I'll share with my colleagues in the subcommittee to further enlighten them on the issue you were just describing. But is that memo you described also available that you sent around ahead of time, since it didn't go through the committee process on the?
Oh, yeah, well, it was, yes, both of those can be sent to you directly.
Great, I appreciate it. My colleague Delegate Beitzel's not here, so he can't ask you the question he's going to ask, which is, do you know the impact those changes might have on the overhead rates charged?
So I can tell you that.
And you can follow up. You don't have to click around and find it now. That's
okay, yeah, we had it yesterday, and I moved it from my.
Yeah.
Yes, we can get that to you. Great.
Any questions from my other colleagues? Your actual treasurer may have a comment. He just came on the camera.
So actually, Mr. Patel probably knows the answer off the top of his head, so we can just give it to you now, Mr. Patel.
Okay, so the 1,500 bonus, it was presented to the board, and we made a determination that it is that particular money, which is about 1,014,000, will come from contingency funds, which is the previous earnings that Mr. Gray mentioned, that we have unrestricted retained earnings and contingency fund. So it will not impact the future overhead rates. We're not going to consider that as increase in the overhead rates for all the customers, because this money was already earned and reserved. As far as the 3% increase is concerned, our overhead rates are determined based on billable labor. So we take the overhead expenses for the fiscal year and divide by billable labor. So this 3% increase will increase the billable labor. So it will be a very small impact on all our customers, because the overhead expenses will slightly increase, but the billable labor will also increase because of 3%. So I don't see any of those two impacting the overhead rates going forward.
Thank you. And just to be clear, I commend you for taking care of the employees. Just want to understand some of the implications of it as well. Any questions from my colleagues? Great. Well, thank you again to the entire MES team, including Dr. Glass and Judge Schmalkin. We appreciate you all being here. And to my subcommittee colleagues, we are back again tomorrow afternoon with the Maryland Auto Insurance Fund and the Motor Vehicle Administration. So look forward to seeing everybody then. Thank you all. I think with that, we are adjourned. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, sir.